same way too. There's no one's loving as sweet as his loving with you. Sweet love, sweet loving. Sweet love, sweet loving.
So many different ways to show what you feel for someone, but you know.
Just need you here right by my side.
Excellent. Oh, let's start. The volume is on. Aloha, everybody. Esteemed guests and colleagues. Welcome to the third parallel session entitled Wellbeing Economy, Co-Creating a Fair and Inclusive Europe. It's organized by the Faculty of Social and Educational Sciences at NTNU, and this is the first time we've been invited to do so. So we're very happy to have a topic that's not exactly tech-heavy, but informing the tech-heavy approach. My name is Jesper Petersen. I'm the Vice Dean of Research at that faculty, and I will guide you to the presentations today. First, a little bit of sort of setting the scene. In this parallel session, I invite you to think about alternative visions to guide societal development for the future and to guide disruptive and transformative change in the present. What is at stake is to reorganize our societies and economies from emphasizing the acceleration of material, unsustainable growth into an economy of well-being, where the well-being of people and planet is placed at the center. It positions the economy as an enabler of societal outcomes, tipping the pyramid of priorities on its head and widening the concept of health to include broader notions of connection and community. Now, it shouldn't be too surprising why we need those changes. Nobody needs to be reminded that we're living in turbulent times with helicopters circling over our heads and police officers standing at the gates of this building. I mean, it's just remind us that there are inequalities, polarization, war, reduced trust. There's everything going on at the moment. Heated planet. Those are just some of the problems we're facing. So what's at stake, in our opinion, is how the research community, how governments and societies work to support the development of wellness and fairness across generations. That, of course, includes care for the planet that's supposed to sustain these future generations. So next month, WHO is organizing a high-level solution forum for member countries on this very subject, something I'll remind you at the very end, so you can continue thinking about these things. But, okay, there's a need for radical socioeconomic transformation and making a shift towards pursuing missions where economies and societies encourage well-being rather than fractures and breakdown. Champion cities and countries are currently paving the way. Scotland, Iceland, New Zealand, Finland and Wales taking an early lead, but others are soon to follow. This aligns very well with NTNU's strong commitment to emphasize social sustainability and community as base-level factors for solving these wicked problems of climate change and economic inequality, as understood through the Sustainable Development Goals. Community with each other and the planet is at the heart of achieving social, environmental, and economic sustainability together. So, to investigate this, we've invited a panel of distinguished policymakers, practitioners, and researchers with us to discuss promising practices, policy responses, and research initiatives across Europe. The task is set: paving the road towards co-creating a fair and inclusive well-being economy in Europe, where no one is left behind. But let me first present the speakers to give you a feel of how each individual presentation will fit together as a whole, because there's an intention behind the presenters we have chosen. The first speaker is on film, so you won't see her here. Katja Iversen is the Central Policy Advisor to the World Economic Forum, the WHO, and other world leaders. And she will be talking to us on film about thriving, not just surviving, why the well-being economy needs to take center stage. We've chosen her because she, as a member of the WHO Euro New Economics Expert Group, is giving advice to WHO and other member states about well-being economy and is as such a central voice with a specific focus on advocacy. Second, we have Caroline Costons, Director of Euro HealthNet, and her presentation will be called A Wellbeing Economy for Healthy People and a Healthy Planet. We've chosen Caroline because she's an important advocate for promoting fairness and wellness in Europe, acting as one of the most important drivers for transformative change, bringing together research communities with relevant and affected stakeholders, organizations, and policymakers. So a very important voice here today. The third presenter is Terje Andreas Eikemo, Professor of Sociology at NTNU. His presentation will be called Why Reduced Inequalities Will Create More Sustainable Societies. And we have chosen Professor Eikemo because of his long-going work with CHAIN, a research group and partnership between NTNU, the Norwegian Public Health Institute, and UNICEF, among others, was working on reducing social inequalities in health and well-being. So we're very excited to welcome you. The fourth man up is Frank Simon Thomas, Head of Unit at the Fair, Green and Digital Transitions in the European Commission. He will present for us some notes about EU policies and R&I actions for fair transitions. And this is an important alternative perspective from the other presenters, an EU perspective on pursuing well-being from a green transition and technological digital revolution perspective. Finally, we welcome Sophie Howe, former Future Generations Commissioner of Wales, but it's in that regard we've invited you because of that job. She will be talking to us about protecting the interests of future generations, the Welsh approach, and we've chosen to conclude with Sophie because she's a pioneer advocate for an ombudsman for protecting and promoting the well-being of future generations in Wales. So it's a very important job she's been doing. The Future Generation Commissioner, she's been for 7 years before leaving the office in January for new and interesting horizons, but it's an inspiration to hear about this work and conclude on that advocacy level. So, there you have it, that's the panel. But before rolling film on our first speaker, I would like to say two things. First of all, a hat tip is due to the academic panel organizers, Ottar is there, Professor Ottar Næss and Associate Professor Dina von Heimburg. Thank you very much for making this possible. They have sort of the masterminds behind the panel composition. And second, you might have noticed that we have 5 speakers and a talkative session chair as well. So we have decided they have so much to say that we have given them about 14 minutes each. Unfortunately, that leaves no time or little time for questions. So hopefully we can throw in a question if possible. But now as Massimo also he's even more talkative than me. He took 10 minutes away. So let's see what we can reach. But it's important to listen to the panelists. So at least we have time for that. Okay, but I think it's worth it. Sit down, relax, listen, and I hope you will engage the practitioners over lunch, for example, with questions and comments afterwards. But first, let's welcome by movie Katja Iversen and her presentation. So roll film, please.
So I'm thrilled to kick off this panel, Wellbeing Economy, Co-Creating a Fair and Inclusive Europe. I'm thrilled about the amazing speakers who will follow me. And I'm very thrilled that there are a lot of participants. Speaking is one thing, but it's the action afterwards that counts and will institute change. So we will all count on you to help make that change. No pressure. Thanks a lot to the team, Dina, Ottar, Eric, and Jesper, for getting all of this and all of us together. So, let me start by saying it straight out. Looking at the world today, the climate crisis, COVID, conflict, cost of living, mental health crisis, and fast-growing inequities, the current short-term profit-oriented economy cannot solve them. And not only that, it's also the underlying reason for many of these maladies. At the root of the problems are economic development models which are based on massive and intensive production and consumption, economic models and economic systems which prioritizes profit for the few over the well-being for the many. An economy that jeopardizes the health and the well-being of people and planet. People want more than to work, make money, and survive. They want to thrive. We want to live in healthy and safe communities, and we expect our authorities to deliver public policies which secure a better life today and for our kids and our grandkids. And governments and the international communities want and need healthy, happy citizens, vibrant economies, and safe and sustainable communities and countries. We need to get back to the key building block for resilient and prosperous economies and societies. In short, we need a shift. We need to look at people, planet, and prosperity, and we need an economy that does the same, putting well-being at the center, a well-being economy. The good news is that it's already happening. More about that later. But let's first look at what we mean with well-being. Well-being is more than happiness and satisfaction. It also includes developing as a person, being fulfilled, feeling safe, feeling that I'm contributing to society. Well-being is important for politics and for politicians. It has massive positive impact on health, and it can lead to entrepreneurial societies. And let's not forget that well-being economies can unlock solutions for current and for future challenges, ensuring that people, economies, and communities are more resilient to threats. Thanks a lot to the Directorate of Health from Iceland for some of these thoughts. The well-being economy approach is underpinned by the principle that public investment, spending, and resources, your investments, spending, and resources should be guided by the extent to how they can improve the well-being of people, planet, and societies, and not just in the usual siloed thinking of economy, which leaves out and don't account for many of the co-benefits. Let me give you an example. Health and education and violence prevention is in traditional economic thinking and budgeting is mainly seen as an expense. But if we look at it from the labor market, who want skilled and healthy workers, it's an imperative and would be seen as a needed investment. We need to capture, measure, and value those co-benefits. So, what are the core dimensions of well-being? Well, dignity. Everybody has enough to live in comfort, safety, and happiness. Nature, a restored and safe natural world for all life. Justice. Justice should be at the heart of economic systems and the gap between rich and poor greatly reduced. Participation. Citizens are actively engaged in communities, in shaping policies, and forming the economy. So this dignity, nature, justice, and participation is not captured by the current GDP, which does not sufficiently measure the well-being of people and planet. Almost on the contrary, having sick people and, for example, oil spills makes GDP go up. So we need to recalibrate the economy to protect and promote health and well-being for all. And as we say a little polemically, well-being is the new GDP, #wellbeing economy. So the good news is, as I said, it is actually already happening. The thinking around a well-being economy is being championed by a growing number of entities, including multiple countries in Europe, the EU, the OECD, multiple civil society organizations and alliances, as well as the World Health Organization, including the European region, and they have initiated the Wellbeing Economy Initiative and the new Economic Expert Group, which I have the pleasure to be a part of. That, led by the Venice Office for Investment for Health and Development, is operationalizing the concept with health at the center and collating good example of what's already happening and what's working. Also, many of your regions or countries or communities are already initiating well-being economic policies, programs, projects, and investments, not least in Scandinavia, but not only. There are a lot of examples. Cross-cutting and comprehensive approaches to improving mental health, holistic approach to decreasing youth drinking, how public spaces are designed and used, implementing circular economy thinking and initiatives, and also rethinking how public institutions, cities, and countries purchase, employ, and use land, labor, and all their other assets to the benefit of communities and to the benefit of the many. The distinguished speakers after me will dig a lot deeper into that and give great examples of both what is being done, what needs to be done, and what role countries and the EU and other institutions can play. The discussion does not start or end here. It's been growing. And in just a couple of weeks in the beginning of March, there'll be a high-level well-being solution forum in Copenhagen focused on health and the well-being economy. Because yes, health has a lot to gain from well-being economies, and well-being economies cannot be achieved without health and health equity. This is, as the title of this introduction says, about thriving, not just surviving, and why the well-being economy needs to take center stage moving forward. We are in a world of polycrisis. I said it before, and we discussed it at the World Economic Forum just 3 weeks ago. Multiple and converging crises. We all need to think and act differently. All of you in this room are in a position of influence and power, big or small. You are privileged and you are powerful. So allow me to leave you with 3 messages, 3 asks, and a tweet. The messages. Well-being is the new GDP. It's a win-win-win for people, planet, and prosperity. And the train is already moving, but it needs a lot more people on board, including you. So my asks of you are, put that well-being lens to all your policies and programs and initiatives. Challenge and change the way budgets are being made and economics is being thought. Capture the co-benefits and read up and help spread the word. And finally, my tweet. Co-creating a fair and inclusive Europe for people, planet, and prosperity. Hashtag well-being economy. Hashtag just do it. Thanks a lot. Have a great panel.
Well, let's pretend she was there. Thank you, Katja, for this stimulating introduction. Now we have the pleasure of introducing Caroline Costons to the stage, the director of Euro HealthNet, a well-being economy for healthy people and a healthy planet. So take it away.
Thanks a lot. And we're watching for my presentation. Yes, there it is. Yes, it's a pleasure to be here. And maybe a few words about Euro HealthNet for those that do not know us. We are a European partnership for promoting health equity and well-being, and we have more than 60 organizations on board. The majority are national public health institutes, some regional health authorities, and also some health ministries, but also several key research institutions, and I'm very happy to have NTNU as a partner, a member of Euro HealthNet, as well as Chain, and we'll hear from Terje Ekemo later. We are based in Brussels, not too far from here, and one of our key roles really is to, to liaise with policymakers in the Commission and the Parliament, and to advocate for health equity and well-being, and tackling health inequalities, because that's really our mission: is to tackle health inequalities and to look at the root causes for ill health and disease, and work on the social determinants of health. And we are increasingly taking a systems approach to our work. And this was further really exacerbated by the COVID crisis, because we saw that COVID was addressed very biomedical ways, while we were arguing you also need to address it from psychosocial perspectives and address it much more holistically, because we have seen that inequality and various social factors have magnified the severity of COVID-19. So this holistic systems approach is very much needed if we tackle the various challenges that we are having today. The same for climate crisis. It is very clear that we are not living sustainably. We are overproducing and overconsuming, and this is making us sick. 1 out of 3 children nowadays, according to WHO data, is overweight or obese. I mean, that's almost criminal. Huh? About 400,000 people per year are dying prematurely because of air pollution in the EU. Diabetes, if you compare figures now compared to 2 decades ago, it has doubled. So our society and the way we are living is making us sick, and at the same time it's also damaging the planet, as we know. So again, we need to take this, this overarching approach and really look at the root causes, because a lot of the root causes is the economy and the way how our economy is designed. It is designed in such a way that it doesn't really take into account nature. It is blind to inequality, and it is obsessed with short-term profits and GDP. So we need a shift in mindset, and the well-being economy is a very attractive and inspiring concept that we at EuroHealthNet have embraced and use it in our advocacy, and I hope you will do that too as well in your work. It is actually introduced at the European level by Finland with the Finnish presidency of the EU. They produced council conclusions on the economy of well-being, where they stated really we need to invest in well-being, so because that's also good for the economy. So well-being and economy are 2 sides of the same coin. And indeed, as Katja was also saying, it's already used by various countries. Finland themselves have a well-being strategy. They also have set up an expert group on the economy of well-being, and I'm happy to be part of that and to see how Finland is. I wouldn't use the word struggling in their own country, but trying to push for the well-being approach in their own country. Very interesting. And of course also in Wales, I'm looking forward to hear the example from Sophie. A second very important model I find, and which is more of a systematic approach and a systems approach, is the donut economy of Kate Raworth. She is saying that we need to define a safe space for the economy to thrive, and the safe space respects very much the social foundation. We shouldn't exploit people, and at the same time it safeguards and respects the ecological ceiling, that is the outer ring, so we shouldn't overshoot the planetary resources. And that is why we want to see the economy to thrive and to grow into a safe and a quality economy. And this is how we would want politicians and policymakers and professionals to look at our economy in such a safe way, and also private sector, of course, and that they start to value well-being and nature. The various modules that we have seen floating around on the economy of well-being have three values. One value is that indeed the economy serves people and planet, and not the other way around. That prevention and working upstream is key, rather than spending a lot of money to repair or fixing the damage. And also that the economy of well-being or well-being economies get a higher return on investment due to the additional benefits of well-being. And doing nothing or business as usual is also costly. So it's better to get this extra return on the investment. We are part of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, and they have set out principles that a well-being economy, if you want to achieve a well-being economy, that all policy and programs should adhere to. And actually it was nice to see that Katja in her video mentioned the same principles, and that's a good thing. Because the economy of well-being is for many people sort of vague. I mean, it's interesting because everyone thinks, oof, that sounds good and let's do it. And at the same time, you think, but what is it then really? So everyone that's working on economy of well-being and part of these alliances should move towards a more unifying concept. What does it mean? So I was very happy to see Katja referring to the same principles. So this means that every policy and program that we launch need to be respectful of dignity, of nature, should have a common purpose, should be fair, and should allow people to participate. And I would like to dive a little bit more into the details of this. So dignity. We want everyone to have enough to live in comfort, safety, and happiness. So this is very much about social protection. And this week I was at the launch of this very nice report of the high-level group on the future of social protection and of the welfare state in the EU. I can really recommend to you to read it. It is an ambitious report setting out 21 recommendations also for the next legislative period for the European Commission on how to maintain social protection and our welfare state, and how to, in particular, boost social investment. It's more than social protection, it's also social investment across the life course. I also wanted to flag up here the European Care Strategy that was launched last year. It's very strong on strengthening long-term care, as we want older people to be able to live in dignity and have a quality of life. So it's an important document. Another obviously super key at the EU level, which is the European Pillar of Social Rights, setting out these 20 principles, and again, an important tool for us to work on if we want to achieve an economy of well-being. The second principle, all of the policies that we design should at least do no harm. But better helps to restore nature and our biodiversity and mitigate the climate crisis. We heard this morning during the plenary session the Commission representative talking about European Green Deal, very important framework, which I will not talk about in detail. I just wanted to highlight the farm to fork strategy. Because I feel that the area of food and sustainable food is crucial, and so links so much to well-being and health, as well as to nature, because we are consuming far too much ultra-processed food, which has no nutrients whatsoever, is addictive, and is making us sick. We consume too much meat. We need to move to plant-based food. We want to boost ecological farming, bio-industry. It's a whole area, and we have a whole session at this conference on this food topic, which I look forward to hear the outcomes of. The third one is the purpose. This is about a sense of belonging and serving the common good. This is working towards common goals, and I think the example from Wales is very crucial here. It's about working together across sectors, but also about pooling budgets and being more efficient in a way, and to see how you can have these co-benefits. But as our societies are changing, It's also about negotiating a new social contract between old and young, between people living here or elsewhere in the world, or between our generation and future generations. I've heard from someone who said, when we have meetings and talk about the future, we always have an empty chair. Because that represents the person that's not yet born, or the people that are not yet here. So we need to see, okay, what set of policy actions can we think of? There are always trade-offs to be made. What are these trade-offs? What are the costs? What are the benefits? And what is this new social contract? And Minou Shafik, in her book, she says, okay, what do we owe? What do we owe the society? What does the society owe us? And very important to think about in the context of an economy of well-being. Equity. This week, the Eurobarometer came out. They interviewed over 20,000 European citizens, and 81% agreed that income differences are too great, and they want member states to take action on that. 1/5 of children in the EU live in poverty. At the European Union, they are working on a recommendation on minimum wage and minimum income. And the European Child Guarantee is, I find, a nice holistic policy instrument where they want to guarantee for every child safe housing, quality education, health, access to healthcare, early childhood support as well. So a very, very nice one. But equity, and I know that Terje will talk much more about health inequalities and equities, and it's crucial and core. Last but not least is participation. We can only arrive at an economy of well-being if we do that with the people, and we need to strengthen mechanisms for participatory governance, very much so, and we need to listen to the voices of people and to make sure that we do not unintentionally do harm or widen the equity gap, for example. So in projects that we did, we see that there's a lot of action on the ground in communities, many citizens' activities and initiatives for a better world. And local authorities need to have specific strategies in place to take those on board, to embed them in their work, to give them some seed money, to take away administrative barriers or legal barriers, and capitalize actually on the assets in the communities and working from the bottom up. I like very much the concept of systems leadership. This is indeed working and identifying the change agents and the leaders in the communities, in religious communities, in cities, mayors, regional, different sectors where you can spot them and work with them and to build this change. Lastly, member states and governments do not yet have structured channels in place to get this engagement organized. So we need to do a lot of capacity building there and see how that can be done well. There are examples of citizen panels and so on, and even at the EU level there was the conference on the future of Europe, talking and being in dialogue with citizens, but we can do that further and much better. My last slide, indeed, it's very timely, this conference. There are other important events happening. The WHO event was already mentioned and will be further talked about in this session. I noticed this conference in the European Parliament, actually, initiated by a group of 20 MEPs, members of European Parliament, across parties, on beyond growth and thinking about sustainable prosperity in the EU. So politically very important. Then there are various alliances like the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, of which we are part, but also the Global Health and Climate Alliance. EuroHealthNet, we are analyzing the European semester process every year, which is a macroeconomic process of the Commission, and to see whether that benefits well-being. And today, actually, we produced our flashcard tool on the European pillar of social rights, and I can share the links if you are interested. Sustainable Development Goals, there's another opportunity. I won't mention it here, and I'm sure I have other events happening. I just wanted to say that, I mean, this is indeed a big picture change. This is about achieving an economy that values what matters to people and to planet. And we all have a role to play. We can all be change agents. And I really hope that you, with us here at the panel in this session, are a bit sort of inspired to also take some of this back to your work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline, for this inspiring presentation. I was talking to Ota yesterday about we need slogans like farm to fork. We talked about womb to wrap up as an example of sort of the same thing for well-being economy. But you can think about that, and we can talk about it in the break. That slogan we need. Now, allow me to introduce Terje Eikemo to the stage. He will talk to us about why reduced inequalities will create more sustainable societies. Take it away, Terje.
Hello, everyone. First, a few words about Jane, perhaps. You started off with a few words about your HealthNet. So we are the leading global interdisciplinary research center for the global study of health inequalities. We monitor the developments, we explain their causes, and we try to find the right tools to reduce these inequalities. Also in collaboration with your HealthNet, who are really helpful also in translating our research into policy documents. So it's a great relationship that we have there, and I have the best hopes for the future in that regard. So a well-being economy really starts from the idea that public interests should form our economic policies and not the other way around. So this implies that governments should carefully consider what matters for people. So what is it that matters for people? What matters for you? It's the planet, our nature, our communities, and all the conditions that must be put in place to help people reach their potentials in all aspects of life. And such aspects may include the ability to live a long and happy life for ourselves, for our families, having access to necessary resources to live and thrive, and to be able to trust our neighbors, and having the freedom to educate ourselves and our children. So, a well-being economy must prioritize investments in people's health, education, employment, and also establish social protection systems for the benefit of all of us. Let's see if I can get this to work. Is there a pointer? No, that was not. Where is it that I need to point? The red button, the green. Fantastic. From now on, I will do that every time. Now, the development of social protection programs in national legislation systems are increasing in the world. So that's good news. But there are large regional variations in the speed of this improvement. Now, this in turn has resulted in large variations in effective coverage for children and families, disfavoring the global south. And this pattern coincides with the pattern we see for child mortality, and that is not a coincidence. There is no country in the world that has been able to protect their populations from the detrimental consequences of poverty. And we cannot say that we have achieved a well-being economy until our children, regardless of where they are born, are not only able to celebrate their 5th birthday, but also to fulfill their dreams. Now, inequality kills everywhere. So people living under suboptimal social conditions from all corners of the world are far more likely to live in poorer health and to die earlier than the wealthy. And inequalities in health and well-being, they start to emerge during early childhood, and despite massive improvements in our abilities to prevent and treat ill health, they continue to grow. Now, Chain's vision is to promote health equity through data capacity building and research excellence. So we need to embed our policy decisions on research. So we provide advanced global surveillance of socioeconomic inequalities in health, well-being, mortality, and their social determinants in all countries and territories with available data. Now, this is an effective way to determine how far we have come or how far we are away from achieving a well-being economy in different regions. So in Chain, we also identify the most effective political tools to make sure that social and economic inequalities do not translate into social and economic inequalities in health. Such inequalities are, in fact, avoidable, they're unacceptable in civilized societies, and they may also hinder further economic growth. Now, a little bit statistics, I mean, you can handle that. So let us compare the performance of two countries, carefully selected, with two very different economic systems, or well-being economies, if you like. My own country, Norway, is a country with a largely tax-financed universal health and welfare system. So how does Norway compare in terms of income differences in life expectancy with the US, a country with a less inclusive social protection system? Well, income, as you can see, is associated with longer life expectancy in both countries. But the largest differences between the countries are observed among individuals in the lower to the middle part of the income distribution. It means that the Norwegian system is more protective of your health if your income is low. So the differences between the US and Norway are remarkable, but of course not very surprising. They're also not sustainable because they hinder large proportions of people to take part in social life and employment. So people become a burden of health systems that are under increased pressure instead of contributing to economic growth. So the fact that inequality kills at such a large scale is exactly why Chain has taken upon a global responsibility to monitor the extent of health inequalities in the world. So, for example, we, together with the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation at the University of Washington, we are aiming now to include social factors into the Global Burden of Disease study, the largest consortium in science. And this will be a big game changer in the field, we believe. Now, inequality needs to be firmly established as a global determinant of health and well-being, and is key to the understanding of the causes and consequences of many global trends. Now, this includes, but it's not limited to, climate change, pollution, extreme weather, conflicts, vaccine nationalism, migration, far-right populism, demographic crisis, and pandemics. Because none of these trends are hitting people and societies equally, and counteracting this will be essential in the creation of well-being economies. Now, you've seen this before today, not really easily readable, but you can find a citation. The pandemic is a striking example. As Chain researcher Claire Bangra has suggested, we are experiencing a syndemic pandemic, which means that the pandemic taps into and reinforces existing levels of inequalities. Now, this is one of many fact sheets that Your HealthNet is helping us prepare based on our research. And it really shows that the virus has represented a double burden for many disadvantaged groups in our societies. People are not just hit by the virus itself, but also by the social and economic consequences of lockdowns in terms of job loss, social isolation, reduced income, and access to healthcare. So I'm very proud to announce that Chain is now leading the global effort to assess the importance of inequality for COVID mortality in the world, and to reveal their pathways. The work is commissioned by the UN and the WHO as part of their technical advisory group on COVID-19 mortality. And in the last issue, which is what you can see here in the WHO bulletin, we have presented our research plan and asked the world community to help us. And they have reached out to us. And the results will be invaluable to governments in making recommendations regarding key priorities in areas moving forward. We fear that we will see a substantial increase in the global health gap in the post-COVID area unless we are able to implement strategies and economic systems that can lessen the long-term population health impact of the virus. So the coronavirus may have changed the game, but inequality is still the key player. The Nordic paradox. What is a Nordic paradox? Well, it refers to the fact that health inequalities exist, and perhaps even larger than they should be, given the Nordic countries' egalitarian social and economic policies. But perhaps they haven't been properly tested until the pandemic came. So, as we argue in this article in Social Science and Medicine, we now have a window of opportunity to identify whether and how comprehensive welfare states really work. So periods of economic shocks can really tease out the real value of national policies. And perhaps we now have a chance to establish the merits of the Nordic model as a global example in fighting inequities and future pandemics. Chain has now developed the data that can do this. As part of the European Social Survey, around 11, we have developed a module of the social determinants of health that was implemented in 2014 and which will be implemented again in 2024. It is funded by the European Commission, and it involves more than 100,000 face-to-face interviews around Europe, before and after the pandemic. Now, this is one of Chain's biggest successes, and we expect that this module will become a key policy tool for governments in designing public health policies and social policies to promote health and well-being in their populations, among adults. Because a well-being economy also needs to focus on the post-pandemic generation, the children. But we don't have the data to support this. In order to get the evidence we need, we must invest in research infrastructure, and this is the time to do it. So together with coordinators of Guide Eurocohort, so if you haven't heard of this study, I suggest you write it down. We are now trying to find funding for the first comparative birth cohort study in Europe, where we will include a sample of about 10,000 newborns, as well as a sample of school-aged children in each European country. Both cohorts will be followed up regularly, but we need more countries on board. And the study will be able to answer how it affects children's health and well-being to grow up in a digital and post-COVID world, in different countries, with different social and economic systems. Some global trends are positive, and we need to get the whole picture. Now, many of these are related to education, which is a key research area of Chain. Now, and last year, Chain researchers published a study in Nature showing that the world is largely on track to achieve nearby universal primary education by 2030. And a few months later, we published a study in The Lancet where we identified a universal link between parental education and child mortality. A link which has the same strength everywhere, regardless of where you live. So 1 year added education among mothers mean that our children have a 3% increased chance of surviving their first 5 years. And fathers matter too. So 1 extra year of education among fathers increases the chance that the child has to survive its first 5 years with 1.6%. We discovered that every year of education counts equally, so there is no roof. And also that education becomes more important as a child grows older. And of course, all of this has really strong implications on where we should invest to protect the health of populations. It should also be outside the healthcare sector. Now to the climate crisis. I'm trying to cover a lot during this presentation. Now, the global burden of the sea study, a close partner of Chain, recently showed that both warm and cold temperatures are leading to lost years in good health. And inequality is important in this picture as well, because not everyone has the opportunity to move to a safer place. Climate change affects air quality, drinking water, the frequency of extreme weather, food availability, and housing security. And the UN has estimated that between 2030 and 2050, climate change will cause 250,000 extra deaths annually, and most of them in developing countries. Now, let's look ahead. What does the future hold for the world? What kind of trends can we still expect to see that are of relevance for inequality research and for the promotion of well-being economies? We will become increasingly educated. Fertility rates will decrease. Population growth will stagnate and decrease quite radically to 8.8 billion people towards the end of the century. So almost all countries will have to become more liberal with regards to labor immigration, economic growth will stagnate, and power structures in the world will change. African and Arabic countries will become more powerful, while the opposite is the case for Europe and Asia. Inequality will continue to play a key role, but perhaps in new ways. In particular, we are concerned about women's increasing burden and rights in a new world where we will be more, both dependent on more births and a larger workforce. So I will now conclude. So in order to evaluate our progress in achieving well-being economies, we must monitor the developments of social inequalities and how they translate into different life chances, into trust, well-being, and mortality. Sometimes inequalities might be invisible for the naked eye, but they manifest themselves and tend to increase during times of crisis. So how much inequality should we accept for the sake of obtaining economic growth? And for how long should we pursue economic growth at the expense of achieving equity? Now, this will be a point for discussion afterwards, but my answer is that social inequalities work against sustainability. A well-being economy implies that economic growth should be seen as a means of obtaining equity and should not by itself be the goal. As I've tried to show, stimulating economic growth may be an ineffective way to reduce poverty if we do not simultaneously manage to reduce social and economic inequalities between and within countries. So reducing inequality is therefore essential to ensuring better health in the world and will be strengthening the resilience of our societies. And if you want to read more about Shane, there will be information brochures around where you can read our last updates in our annual report. And I hope that you enjoy this presentation and the rest of the session. So, okay.
Thank you very much. There are many Instagram-worthy graphs and maps there. I think we're moving from a research-heavy presentation to a policy-heavy presentation. Please let me welcome Frank Siebern-Thomas, who will discuss with us EU policies and RI actions for fair transition. So take it away, Frank.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation and for giving me the opportunity to add, as you just suggested, a perspective from the EU policy field, and with a focus on fair transition. We'll focus on the area of the green transition, but also look at it from the perspective of a unit dealing with research programming in the context of Horizon. Let me start. I'll try also to find out here how this works. Which of the, this green, two green. Okay. Let me start with the context, which was already mentioned this morning, which is in which we find ourselves, which is well known. So we have on the upper right, as you see, the transition, the agreed commitments transition towards the 2030 targets and the climate neutrality in 2050, the long-term strategy, which is largely supported by a majority of Europeans. Some 90% of Europeans are in favor of a just transition and are aware of the needs. But this long-term strategic goal is obviously under pressures from two sides. On the left side, the current developments we see relating to energy prices, cost of living crisis, and others already mentioned this morning, which have led to a number of fast reactions also at European level, the Repower EU plan and emergency interventions to ensure energy security, diversification of energy sources, but also creating new forms of solidarity across member states, including in the social field, to address this. Yet, for more than 90% of Europeans, energy prices are a serious concern, and it's under pressure also from the scientific angle. The IPCC report last year was very clear about this, stating that without immediate and deep emission reductions across all sectors, the 1.5 degree target will be out of reach, which probably it is, but at least another argument for accelerating. But the only way out, if we do not deliver on this urgency, would be mass social and societal transformations. So yes, while every transformation has social impacts, the alternative of not delivering fast on what we can do would be that those transformations could be much, much bigger with a lot of, let's say, challenges ahead. And this leads me to say that obviously the focus It was never more important to focus on just transition, to focus on social sustainability, the issues of this session, as was made clear by Executive Vice President Franz Timmermans when he defended the 2030 target initially in the European Parliament, where he coined the sentence that transition has to be just, or there will just be no transition, and this has not changed and has become ever more important since. On the foundations here, on the strong, which I call a strong social Europe for just transitions, because that was the title of the communication the Commission issued in the run-up to the action plan of the European Pillar of Social Rights. And in this context, obviously, describing the policy framework, the focus on social sustainability, social resilience, and social fairness, which do underpin EU policy actions, are of central importance. I think the policy framework was described already by many speakers before. On the one side, the Sustainable Development Goals, and on the other hand, the European Pillar of Social Rights, which are enshrined in these, and I come to the action plan in a minute, but a lot of initiatives were already mentioned in the presentations before. Social sustainability in this context relates to different dimensions. It's about ensuring inclusive growth, something which we have not necessarily seen in all member states or overall after the economic and financial crisis and back in 2008, 2010. It's about ensuring the sustainability of our social model under threat, or let's say, which has to adjust to the mega trends, as was mentioned and presented in the high-level group report on the future of the welfare state earlier this week, and ensuring social resilience in the transition and in times of crisis more generally, so to ensure that we can deal with external shocks coming our way. These are, I think, the three answers to many of the challenges we meet: to strengthen social Europe, to put in place the right policies for fair transitions, and to design R&I actions, on which I will come in a second. I will not go into detail in the interest of time also on the SDGs and on the European Pillar of Social Rights, just with these nice colorful charts to say that, as the previous speaker said, the European Commission's priorities, as defined by this Commission, actually do put the economy serving people and planet center stage. So you have on the left side the 6 Commission priorities of this Commission, on top the European Green Deal, and second, an economy that works for people. They do overlap with a lot of important SDGs, including those on well-being, and they do meet, I think, at least this ambition to bridge social and environmental sustainability concerns, and you can decline this also for the other priorities, obviously. On the side of the European Pillar of Social Rights, was mentioned already, that sets out the key principles for policy making for strengthening social Europe overall. And this is a vast array of principles, from inclusive access to education, training, gender equality, equal opportunities, active labor market policies, all the way to access to affordable housing and essential services, including energy, mobility, digital communications, but also other basic needs. This is the guideline of our policy making at European level. And what is interesting in this context, where headline targets have been set for 2030 to also match ambitions on the climate side with ambitions on the social side, to increase the employment rate to 78% by 2030, to ensure that 60% of adults can participate in training every year. That will be a big step up from where we are now, and to reduce poverty by at least 15 million, which is a challenging task, again, being yet again in another crisis after having formulated the target. There's a broad commitment to the European Pillar of Social Rights across all institutions, and the President of the Commission, when celebrating this commitment, said it's now high time that we reconcile the social and the market in today's modern economy, and therefore I will set up an action plan. And this action plan, without going into detail, the Commission, let's put it differently, in its mandate, the Commission has delivered or will have delivered on all principles. For all principles, it will have suggested actions, initiatives, some very far-reaching, many were already suggested presented by speakers before. I just add 2, a historic directive on adequate minimum wages, something a few years ago most of us would have thought is not possible, and also a temporary support instrument to promote short-time work during the COVID crisis, supporting more than 4 40 million Europeans in some cases, in some instances during the COVID pandemic, to maintain employment and income during the crisis. The labor market has shown incredible resilience. The labor market figures at the outcome, let's say at the current juncture, are good, but uncertainty is extremely high, obviously, and this is the situation in which we find ourselves now. Let me come to fairness, inclusion, and well-being in the European Green Deal. The Green Deal was mentioned already before. As I mentioned when presenting the European Green Deal and the Fit for 55 package shortly after, she highlighted that this package aims to combine the reduction of emissions with measures to preserve nature and to put jobs and social balance at the heart of this transformation. So the focus on just transition aspects, the focus on the integrating the social dimension of climate policies and energy policies into policymaking from the outset has always been there. It's one about actions now, about putting this into place. And I would like to present you two tools we have set up in the context, one in the context of Fit for 55. That's the Council recommendation on ensuring a fair transition towards climate neutrality, and one is part of the Green Deal, which is the the Environmental Action Programme, which has a specific reference and importance for the discussion on well-being. Let me come to the Council recommendation on fair transition first. As part of the second Fit for 55 package proposed in December 2021, we have proposed such a Council recommendation which recognizes that despite putting in place a just transition fund to help coal regions phase out industries, despite putting in place a social climate fund which addresses the hardships which may come or price increases with the introduction of a new emissions trading scheme to buildings and road transport. There may be, or there are, more general employment, social skills, distributional impacts of the green transition which have to be catered for, and it has to be ensured that member states and regions also take actions to promote just transitions at their level. Therefore, a recommendation which was negotiated under French presidency, adopted unanimously in June 2022, which has three big blocks: a block through which member states commit to put in place comprehensive policy packages to assess the challenges for just transition and to put in place policies to provide active support to transitions into quality employment, new forms of employment, new sectors of the green economy as well, like the circular economy, but also in other sectors, education, health, those we're discussing here, which are equally important for a sustainable transition. The second one, obviously, reskilling, upskilling during the transition, but the third one and fourth one, equally important, provide sufficient social protection, income support during those transitions, and provide access to essential services, including for alternative forms of transport, for example, which allow you to shift forms of mobility. The second block is about stakeholder engagement and evidence base. This transition has to be inclusive, involve all stakeholders. Employment and social policies have to be geared towards, let's say, this transition, but also energy, climate, environmental policies have to integrate from the outset the social impacts they can have and build them into policy making, as if the transition is not just, there will just be no transition. And the last one is the optimal use of funding, including synergies with programs like Horizon Europe, where there's also gains to be made. I'm mentioning this recommendation and would like to go into two in the evidence-based inclusive wholes of society approach, because they relate to research and innovation particularly. Recommendation 8 says that it's important to advance the green transition in an inclusive and democratic way. Member states should coordinate policymaking at all levels in all areas, including research and innovation. Obviously, this transition will not happen without research and innovation. And equally importantly, number 9, evidence-based approach. Here, it's important to ensure just transition that we also ensure the availability and quality of data and evidence. So to that aim, it's important that member states help strengthen research and innovation actions at regional, national, and union levels, enhance modeling and assessment capacities to assess what are the expected and actual employment and social dimensions of climate change policies, and also make better use of existing indicators and monitoring frameworks or develop new ones. And I come to that in a second on the well-being economy. What type of data do we look at, or what do we use? Just a snapshot, because this is what either in-house research we do, or where we need really input from researchers. This is another Eurobarometer which was published last year on fairness perception of the green transition. As I said before, you see 88% agree that transition should be just, but when you ask people, are you confident that by 2050 we will be able to achieve or to put in place these sustainable energy products and services and they will be affordable to all, a majority is not confident. And that can vary a lot across member states and can reach up to 2/3 of the population in some member states. Here's a trade-off, a dilemma we have to take care of and have to better understand what are the drivers of perceptions of people in setting up such policy packages. Energy poverty was also mentioned before, and just to say energy poverty is a serious issue. It's something which obviously risks increasing in the current situation. It's not a phenomenon of only low-income households, poor income households. It's also in relation to the previous speaker, an issue for lower middle income groups in particular, and increasingly affecting those. We have to take this into account, and we are also developing notions of transport poverty. For example, there are other phenomena which are important to address. Some people who cannot afford, do not have access to affordable transport solutions. And the third issue, which we think needs to be looked at, is the question of carbon inequalities, that effects and efforts of emission reductions are unequal. There's a lot of work done by the World Inequality Lab in Paris, which shows you that those who, in particular, the bottom 50% of income groups here at country level, but you can also consider it within countries, only account for 10% of emissions, but have the biggest brunt of effects and don't have capacity to deal with this. And we look also at how can we cater, let's say, how can we ensure that funds collected can be used in a way that we cushion distributional effects and avoid regressive effects of policies. One word, if I may, on the Environmental Action Programme, because this is an interesting one, which does have concrete references towards a well-being economy. It states as an objective that we want to advance towards a well-being economy that gives back to the planet more than it takes. So it's living well within the planetary boundaries, promote a regenerative growth model, a circular economy, and strengthen resilience and reducing vulnerabilities also by focusing on zero pollution, biodiversity, ecosystems. Last slide on the Environmental Action Programme. It has references to monitoring frameworks, scoreboards, indicators to be developed with an explicit call to develop a beyond GDP dashboard to assess performance and societal progress beyond GDP and to report regularly on the progress made in this context. Preparatory work on this is going on in the European Commission to develop an integrated framework for sustainable and inclusive well-being. Let me finish with one last slide on the research and innovation actions, because in our areas, activities on Horizon Europe, we do design topics which show to you what are our key interests and where we need, where we think there could be evidence gaps or where further work is needed. And I have listed here some topics which relate to the issues of well-being or fair transition. For example, a topic from 22 on public policies and indicators for well-being and sustainable development, and another one on developing the strategies towards sustainable economic policy paradigms. And in the lower row, you have a couple of topics looking at how can we strengthen our capacities to assess socio-economic impacts of the green transition. For example, to develop a knowledge platform and network for social impacts of the green transition, for tackling inequalities in the green transition, or for strengthening economic fairness and resilience of active labor market policies. Having said this, and I conclude on this, we also work to promote social sciences, humanities throughout the program, including in other clusters. Living labs were mentioned, or other climate justice projects under Cluster 5. We promote a new R&I action in the European research area on the future of work. We set up a community of practice on SSH to have an open discussion with you this year and the following years on what are the evidence gaps, what's missing. And we are also launching a call on social innovations for fair transitions to get ideas from the ground on how this can be done in communities, in companies, because, as was said several times already, time is now for action, and we hope that these frameworks help to speed up action in the current context. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Frank, for this stimulating presentation. I was wondering, who are the 8% who totally disagrees that we should leave no one behind? I'd like to meet those 8% of... What? We should leave... Yeah, but that's a research question for all of you researchers out there. Who are these 8% that wants to leave someone behind? Okay, now this was a sort of a top-down perspective. Now let me welcome Sophie Howe for sort of a more regional and bottom-up perspective and the final presenter for this evening. Sophie, the stage is yours.
Okay, well, thank you. Diolch yn fawr, as we say in Wales, bore da. Some really interesting perspectives that we've heard today. I'm going to pick up on quite a few of the things that have already been spoken about and talk about how we're putting some of those actions actually in place and making them a reality in Wales through our groundbreaking Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. Why do we need a Future Generations Act? Why do we need to consider the wellbeing economy in the context of how we act today and the effect that that has on future generations to come? Well, it's because the world is unstable for about 6.75 trillion people who are yet to be born. So if we look 50,000 years to the past, there have been about 100 billion people alive and who are now dead. That 7.7 billion needs to change. Those population figures have just gone up, but 7.7 to about 8 billion people living at the moment. But if we look 50,000 years to the future, 6.75 trillion people yet to be born, and the things that we do today will fundamentally impact on the futures that they, or the lives that they lead or don't leave. It's that existential, the threat that we are facing. And that's why we really need a significant shift, because our system, our economic system, our systems of governance, our systems of decision-making effectively discount the interests of these 6.75 trillion people. I'd recommend a book by a friend of mine, Roman Krasnarek, The Good Ancestor, and he talks about us almost colonising future generations, thinking that they're off in some distant colony that we don't need to worry about. And if we look at kind of what happens at the moment, this is kind of a really good quote summarising how our systems work at the moment. So if a monkey hoarded more bananas than it could eat, while most of the other monkeys starved, scientists would study that monkey and say, what the hell is going on with that monkey? But when humans do it, we put them on the front cover of Forbes. And that's essentially where we are with the wealth inequality gap. The vast majorities of the world's wealth concentrated in the hands of very few. It's no surprise, actually, that the vast majority of that wealth also relates to the kind of 100 or so companies that account for about 71% of global emissions. And so we really need to change this model to protect the interests of future generations. If you spend a lot of time with younger people, as I have done over the last 7 years as Future Generations Commissioner for Wales, I have my own 5 future generations in my own home, and they keep me real as well. They have encouraged me to quote Grime, a grime artist, in speeches that I give, and there's a really good one, a guy called Loyal Kana, who says, never has so much been lost by so many because of the actions of so few. And that's essentially where we are in terms of governance and acting in the interests of future generations. The inactions of so few are posing that existential threat to those who are yet to be born, our children, our grandchildren, and future generations to come. In Wales, we are trying to change that. In 2015, we passed a groundbreaking piece of legislation, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which aims to do a number of things. So first of all, it sets out this sustainable development principle, which many of you will recognise, that our public institutions in Wales, it started with 44 public institutions, it's grown to 48. There's another 6 about to be added. The public institutions are all of our local authorities, all of our health institutions, our national bodies like Public Health Wales, Natural Resources Wales, the Arts Council, and really importantly, significantly, Welsh ministers and the Welsh Government themselves must demonstrate how they're taking decisions in a way which meets today's needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. It then sets out 7 long-term wellbeing goals. And these goals were actually devised in conversation with the citizens of Wales. Now, that's really important. Imagine bringing a whole country together to have a conversation about what is the Wales, the Norway, the Netherlands, the wherever that you want to leave behind to your children and your grandchildren. Now, I'm often asked, how do you know what future generations want? Well, they don't talk to me very often because they're not born. Perhaps with advances in AI, that might become possible at some point in the not too distant future. But the answer is we can't possibly know exactly what it is that they want. But, you know, I think we can take a pretty good guess that they want a planet that they're going to be able to live on. They want, you know, to have good health, and they want to have good education, and so on. So the people of Wales came up with these 7 interconnected wellbeing goals. And the word interconnected is also critically important. I'll come back to that. Now, the duties on our public bodies in Wales, all of those 48 institutions, is that every one of them must set objectives which maximise their contribution to all 7 of those wellbeing goals. And that means that these organisations have to work beyond their traditional silos and boundaries. It means that our economy department, who might have previously been given, here you go, your job is to deliver a prosperous Wales, actually your job isn't just to deliver a prosperous Wales. Your job is to deliver a prosperous, healthy, resilient Wales with cohesive communities, thriving Welsh language, one which is healthier and one which is globally responsible. So every aspect of what a department of government or a particular institution does has to consider each of these 7 wellbeing goals. And those connections are so critically important because, you know, quite frankly, in terms of, you know, and I've got a fundamental problem with GDP being the sole measure, as I'm sure most of you in this room do. But even if your quest is kind of, you know, this pursuit of an insatiable growth, there are no jobs and there is no growth on a dead planet. So if we don't you know, act within planetary boundaries, there is not going to be prosperity. If we think about the connections to inequality, well, climate justice is absolutely a matter of gender justice and absolutely a matter of racial justice. If we look at, you know, we saw on some of the last slides, the effect that us in the global north are having predominantly on those in the global south, our Black, Asian friends, colleagues, peers, if we look at the effects that we're having there, it is a racial justice issue and it is a gendered issue as well. So all of these things are intrinsically connected. The next thing that the Act does is sets out 5 ways of working, or a toolkit, if you like, by which the decisions of our public institutions, well, 1, they should apply, and then 2, we will judge them on whether they have applied that. So considering the long-term impact of the things that they do, making sure that they're understanding what long-term trends are emerging and what potential future scenarios they should be aware of, preventing problems from occurring or from getting worse. You know, prevention is much better than cure, of course. Integration, so that's recognising the knock-on consequences and connections between each of those 7 goals, so not working in isolation and not working in their silos. Collaborating, so that's working with each other across the public sector, but also with the private sector, the voluntary sector and citizens. And then involvement, co-production, you know, call it co-production. It's a deeper concept than engagement or consultation. It's involvement, that sense of co-production with communities. And the minister who passed this legislation described it as the Common Sense Act, because I think most of us would agree that these principles of decision-making are inherently common sense, but I also always say, why is it therefore that Wales has had to legislate for common sense? Because if we look at all of that data that you've just seen in all of the rest of the slides, it will tell you that common sense in decision-making is sadly not that common. Hence, we have passed a law in Wales for common sense. So this test in terms of future generations, I don't know if any of you have seen or have used the 3 Horizons model, but this is something that we use quite regularly. So if we look at Horizon 1, and whatever your starting point might be, it might be climate, it might be health inequality, it might be a range of different things, but on many of these issues, we're on a kind of downward trajectory where, you know, we're not really where we want to be. Horizon 3 is where we want to be. Now, the important thing in Wales is that we know where we want to be. Now, you wouldn't think it was revolutionary that a country would know where it wants to be in the long term. You wouldn't think it was revolutionary that a country would have a set of long-term goals. It's completely revolutionary because most countries operate on short-term basis of one party manifesto, one political cycle to the next. The longest term set of objectives we have probably are the SDGs. Of course, the current sort of batch end in 2030. So the importance of having that long-term goal and then backcasting. What is it that we need to do to get us to that long-term holistic goal? And Horizon 2 there in the middle, the blue line, these are the innovations at play. So this is where we bring a range of different partners. We bring in disruptive thinking. We bring in artists with public, local government officials and so on to really think creatively. What are the things that we need to do to get towards that collective vision, to take us from these innovations, hopping over from Horizon 2+ into the new normal. Now, I just want to play this out in a way which shows how this doesn't work if you don't apply back to those principles of decision making, okay? So if we look at this, if our mission is to decarbonise a transportation system, for example, a laudable and necessary aim, actually an innovation at play there or something that we might do, a policy approach might be mass investment in electric vehicles. It might be grants for electric vehicles. It might be mass investment in the infrastructure for electric vehicles. The problem with that, however, is yes, that might solve decarbonisation of your transportation system or solve it at least in to a reasonable degree, but it will actually take us back to an old normal, because if your mission is not just to decarbonise a transportation system, but to improve the health of the nation, to reduce inequality, to build more cohesive communities, and to reduce emissions, then actually EVs are not the answer at all, because we're all still sat in congestion in our electric vehicles rather than our diesel vehicles. We're not talking to each other. We're adding to the statistics that we heard on obesity. And actually, if you're in the poorer demographics, you definitely can't afford an electric car because you couldn't afford a diesel car. So when you think about things holistically and when you apply a well-being lens or framing to every single one of your decisions, it takes you off in different directions. And that's exactly what we've done in Wales in terms of our approach to transport planning. Now, I should say that a little bit about my role. The other significant thing about the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act is it establishes an independent commissioner. So my job, which I finished last week after doing my 7-year term, was to act as the guardian of the interests of the future generations of Wales. And really to sit on the shoulder and be a conscience of decision makers, a conscience on behalf of future generations. And I have powers to intervene and call out what I sometimes call out the madness of decision making, sometimes, and ask them to justify to me how they've applied these legal requirements. The first big test of the legislation was government proposals to build a 13-mile stretch of motorway to deal with the problem of congestion. You will have all seen this in your towns and cities and in your regions. We've got a problem with congestion. What's the answer to that? It's to build a bigger road or build a new road. But in Wales, the test is not how do we deal with the problem of congestion. what's the simplest and the most traditional solution. The test is, how do you deal with the problem of congestion whilst also improving people's health, equality, overall well-being, reducing carbon emissions, not disbenefiting nature, and so on. So I intervened in that issue, and I asked the government to justify to me how they'd applied the Future Generations Act in practice. The result of that was that the government changed their mind. They were unable to justify how they'd applied the Future Generations Act test to that. That was scrapped. It was considered to be a done deal. First time that that's ever happened, where environment and well-being wins over economic gain. And since then, a whole transformation of our approach to transport in Wales. So a new transport strategy prioritising active travel and public transport, a reduction from 2/3 of our infrastructure budget being spent on roads to 1/3, a moratorium on all road building in Wales and reduction of speed limits, and all of that money shifting from roads into public transport and active travel. That's not the only thing. Here, just focusing on health, this concept of kind of well-being economy and how that plays out in health. So the first pilot of a universal basic income in Wales, because poverty and income security is the biggest contributor to those gaps in life expectancy. The importance of developing the health and well-being of children in school as a main purpose of their educational attainment, but also a new curriculum which develops them as ethical and informed global citizens and healthy, active and confident learners and creative and enterprising citizens. Universal free school meals, back to that issue around farm to fork, and we're building that into our approach there. A response to the cost of living crisis, a long-term response, which won't happen immediately, but a publicly owned renewable energy firm. All of these are the sorts of initiatives that are coming to the fore in Wales now as a result of our Future Generations Act. Essentially, this is what we are trying to do. We are trying to find the sweet spots in terms of well-being, trying to apply that test of what is this policy, what is this decision, what is this action going to do to improve the overall well-being of our citizens. Just very quickly, a few things that I have learnt as the world's first Future Generations Commissioner. So the role of a commissioner with a helicopter view of all of those policy areas and all of our main institutions in Wales is really, really important. I would say culture over process every single time. A lot of what we're doing is inspiring people with a vision, a different way of doing things. It's not necessarily about metrics, you need them, but there are a plethora of metrics, frameworks, toolkits, processes out there, and the busy people in our systems don't have time to wade through them or even to know that they exist. They actually need some inspiration, some challenge to innovate, some challenge to connect with others. So there you are, don't obsess over metrics and indicators, you need them, but don't obsess. Build a broad movement. Some of the biggest successes that we've had in Wales is because we've built a movement outside of the very technical stuff that's in the law around this vision for Wales. Our Football Association adopting the Future Generations Act when it doesn't have to is a key indicator of that, and that brings swathes of people with it. Celebrate the small wins and build. So start from where people are at and push them along on a journey, because if you're trying to take someone from there to over there, even though that might be wholly necessary, you're probably going to fail. So small incremental steps are okay. You don't really need more evidence, I'm sorry to say that, in a room of people who build evidence, and I don't quite mean it as flippantly as that, but the evidence is there of all of these things. You know, we've done more damage to the planet, more emissions, since Al Gore did his first Inconvenient Truth, since the UN's framework on climate change, than at any other time in human history. And we know all of the evidence on health inequality. It's just that we're not acting on it. So we need to roll our hands up. We need to stop writing reports. We need to roll our hands up, and we need to get in there with our public sector and with our decision makers to help them do different and better things. And then finally, a lot of time is spent connecting people to people. Ideally constructive disruptors, but a lot of time is that helicopter view, corralling people, convening people, bringing them together with different views. And then finally, I think this kind of sums up what I've learned. Great spirits have always encountered violent opposition from mediocre minds and systems. And I have had some violent opposition, but as my colleagues have said, there is a movement building here. We are on a train. We need more people on a train. And I don't think that, if you look at a small nation like Wales, who is influencing policy even at a UN level, you're never too small to make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah, for a glimpse into your the work you've done in Wales. I'm standing between you and lunch. That's the most power I've had today. I just have one thing to say, that is to remind you of that in about a month's time, there will be this high-level forum on health in the well-being economy in Copenhagen. So if you want to continue working on this is a way to do it. Participate there or watch that space. Or you can, of course, follow all the links and references that you've seen today in the different presentations. I think that is it. So please join me in thanking all the panelists for their interesting contributions. We have no time to debate. We need lunch. So thank you, all of you.